Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, NFL fans of all ages. The draft has come and gone, the picks have been made, and now it's time to make up content for the next 2.5+ months until we get to our division previews going into next season. But way before then, we have some time this week and next. We're going to talk about the draft here, ladies and gentlemen, on the Sports Agents of Chaos podcast, the fastest rising NFL podcast, we like to believe, over the last 100+ episodes. 103, let's go. And the man, the myth himself, he has returned. He was called part-time Podfather last week. He was called out by one of his contenders, the Podfather, the reigning, defending Pick Challenge champion from last season is here. He has returned. Podfather Rick. Rick, how we doing?
Yeah, we got to get a muzzle on that gopher because clearly he's making some snide remarks my way. I regret bringing him into the fold already, but what more can you do? I guess. No, listen, if Justin wants to turn to the dark side and start making some fun of me, then that's fine. He can be just in case Justin, so it's all good.
Just in case Justin is a deep cut, to say the very least. So, ladies and gentlemen, with the Podfather here, Justin is out this week due to fish reasons. Is it due to fish, or do we not know? I don't think it is, but I think for pure comedy, I think we could just pretend that it's because of fish.
Fish is in PH or fish is in F? Which fish are we talking about here? Because
the ones that he always knows.
Think of stories about either one of them, to be honest with you. So yeah.
Let's go both. He went to a fish concert and then also had bad fish, and so
yes.
he's out.
That's all. That's all you need to know. Yes.
There we go. It's canon for this episode. Yes. But now Justin will be back next week, and we will continue this conversation next week because so much happened. Literally, there's 7 rounds of this stuff. Obviously, we're not going. Well, I don't think we'll go into all 7 rounds of talk. But over this week and next week, we're going to be tackling the draft. And I think this week, Rick, and we'll probably go over some of these topics slightly next week when we maybe go down to winners and losers. But we're just going to look at the draft from a bigger, broader sense of story, you could say, and noticeable things that happen. I think especially in the first couple rounds, things that made us react, things that surprised us, trends we noticed, etc. I think that's the way to tackle it now. And then we give it a week, we think about the picks, and then we could maybe give a better take on, okay, winners, losers, teams that had a number of selections that they used, they liked. Some teams got some pretty good depth, I think, in the later rounds of the draft. We could do things like that next week. But for now, it's the big story side of it. So ready when you are, Rick, and away we go on this episode. I think, Rick, the most obvious place to start off with the conversation in regards to the draft, it's draft free agency, it's the league as a whole. It's quarterbacks. What a run on quarterbacks to start this draft, huh? And we expected ultimately that the first 3 picks were going to be quarterbacks, right? I think we always knew that was going to be. We just had 2 questions. One, will it be the Patriots selecting that third quarterback? Were they going to be trading out of it? Which, from what we know after the fact, apparently there were a number of teams that were making offers to the Patriots for that third overall pick that they ultimately declined. And then after that, what other trading up was going to happen, and where were the other quarterbacks going to go? And the answer is pretty dang early, because 6 of the first 12 picks, 50% of the first dozen selections in this draft were quarterback. So I'll run through the list real quick, and you could just take the convo. You could start us off on more what you want to tackle first, Rick. But Caleb Williams going first overall to the former Chicago Bears of the Podfather. Jaden Daniels going to the Washington Commanders at number 2. I think that was about 2 months back at this point. That was like the lock of the century of this draft, aside from Caleb going first. Patriots hold pat. They pick Drake May out of North Carolina. He's going to be going to Foxborough to be the guy. And then at the 8th overall pick, Michael Penix Jr. And I think we'll have plenty to talk about that here momentarily. Minnesota Vikings do a one draft slot trade up with the Jets to get their guy, J.J. McCarthy. And then the Denver Broncos didn't have to do anything, didn't have to consider trading up and losing more future draft assets, which they've been doing a good job at in recent years. They stand pat, and they get Bo Nix out of Oregon. And I think the best question with that selection is, was Sean Payton happier with the pick itself, or happier that he doesn't have Russell Wilson on the team next year, is the thing. So 6 quarterbacks taken pretty early on. No more were taken in the first round, obviously. And all 6 of these guys, who various opinions about over recent weeks and months, all get taken in round 1 Very early. So, Rick, I'll throw it to you first. You pick which direction you want to start us off with. If we go with the top three first, if we go with the later guys, whatever. What do you want to focus on about the quarterbacks first here?
Well, it was the most quarterbacks taken in the first round of the NFL draft since 1983. And if you look at that draft and you look at those quarterbacks that were taken through, you've got some pretty good names there. You've got your John Elways, your Jim Kellys, your Dan Marinos. So it's a pretty decent spread to go through. We knew that 1 and 2 were pretty much locks. We knew that Caleb Williams was going to Chicago and that Jaden Daniels was going to Washington. I think if you were a betting man on that, you probably would have bet $2 and got $2.25 on it because it was just that obvious of a pick. The Drake May one was an interesting one because you're right. There was so much consternation about the Patriots possibly moving around, or that might have been. I almost thought that might have been a pick they would have used on JJ McCarthy, but the lesser tape on all of that was that May is just better than McCarthy is, and I think it's more a fact of the guys that were taken because they're proven commodities, whereas JJ McCarthy was supposed to go in the top 5, but went in 10th because the more you look at JJ McCarthy's overall resume, the more you say he really wasn't doing a whole lot. I was listening going into Brooklyn yesterday to one of the offshoots of CBS Sports Radio, and I forget who the guy is. He goes by the name Papa Bear, which which is interesting enough and all. But he actually said this, and the more I thought of it, the more I liked it. He said, JJ McCarthy. The more you look at his tape, the more you think, what is he? He's an elite leader. Well, that's great, but what does he do on the field that's elite? And he said, this is a good quote. I don't want my starting quarterback to be a good storefront manager. I want him to be like an absolute versatile player. So, McCarthy kind of got knocked down by that, though the smoke was there, and that was the only trade that we saw in the first round for a quarterback was a one pick swap. And again, the Jets, I guess, were fielding offers, and they said to the Vikings, "What are you going to offer us? We're going to give it to somebody else who wants McCarthy. What do you want instead?" I'm skipping over Michael Penix, so I think we can talk about him a little bit more. But the Drake made JJ McCarthy thing was an interesting little debate back and forth, I think. And then I think Sean Payton's press conference was hilarious, where he kind of took credit, but not really, for baiting everyone the Vikings to trade up to get McCarthy, kind of like Sonny Weaver in draft day, where he baited the Seahawks into trading back because he wanted Bo Callahan. Real movie buffs will know that reference, by the way. But look, Bo Nix has got a really good shot to be a really good quarterback in Denver, man. I like that pick for them, and I think it's a smart pick because the rest of their quarterback room is just god awful, with Zach Wilson especially. So having Bo Nix there, I think is good for them. So I think you could say of the 6 quarterbacks taken, I think 4 of them have a chance to make an immediate impact. That would be Williams, obviously, Daniels, obviously, Drake May, because there's really nobody else there. I mean, I know they drafted a quarterback in the 5th round, but let's be real here. And then Bo Nix. So those 4, I think, have the best chance to make an immediate impact. It's the other 2 that could come back to bite those teams. McCarthy, for the reasons I stated, and Penix for, I'm sure, the reasons that you will state, or that maybe next week Justin will go on about, because we had him going 70, folks, in our mock draft, and he went 8th to a team that already has a multi-million-dollar paid quarterback. So real interesting stuff there. But that's what I think.
I was muted. I pulled the Justin. No, but like you said, the top 3, I never had a doubt. Realistically, I think I made the joke that if Bill Belichick was still in charge, it probably would have been JJ McCarthy at the 3rd overall pick, and you won't convince me otherwise. But I believe that all the selections in the top 3 made sense. We knew the Bears were going to go with Caleb Williams. Whoever had the 1st overall pick was going with Caleb Williams. Even if the Panthers still had the 1st overall pick, they probably would have gone with Caleb.
No, because that's not who Tepper wanted.
Nah, that's true. That's true. That's he's not wrong. But Caleb Williams 1st overall, we knew he was going to go. We knew this was his draft class. Jane Daniels just made a ton of sense for Washington with everything they're doing. And I want to give a shout out to Washington because I still think the joke holds true that they paid decent money this offseason to have a pretty mid team. But kind of what we talked about in like some of the free agency recap episodes, there is they're building a structure there, and
Yeah.
for what they might lack in certain areas, to bring in a young quarterback where there's going to be some structure, where it's not willy-nilly, and especially a big thing, it's not an idiot of an owner there. Like I gotta admit, I'm starting to be a little bit more of a fan of the Dan Quinn head coaching hire. Now, I still don't know if he's going to be the head coach there, that if they ever win a Super Bowl with Jane Daniels, I don't know if he'll be the guy there to unlock everything.
Yeah.
Unless they unless they get the next McVay or Shanahan as the OC, then maybe that's a different story, because then you just let the OC do their work. But regardless, I'm liking the structure of Washington a lot more than I did earlier on. So I want to give credit to the Commanders for
Yeah.
what they did, not even just with the Daniels pick, with their first 6 picks. I think it was Justin and Armach who had the 6 Commanders picks.
Yeah.
And I think, in real life, they didn't copy his picks necessarily to a T, but they did a pretty solid job with the picks as a whole. Drake May just made sense to New England. You couldn't go into this season without selecting a top 3 quarterback. You just couldn't. You had to, even if he's not the guy of the future, right? Like you couldn't give any of your fans the impression this season that you just don't care, which it would have been the case if they had not selected a QB. So I think Drake May, I never had a doubt of them keeping it, because I just didn't see a scenario where they would have wanted to make that trade down legitimately. I mean, if it had been for the right price, there's always a price, as we learned from the $1 million man himself, but clearly the price was not met. So I think those 3 picks, aces, no issue. I'll skip slightly. I wasn't shocked that the Vikings had to trade up. I'm almost wondering, and this is one of those things we learned in the lineup, like, insurance policies are always a thing. I wonder if the Vikings had an inkling during the Bears pick if something could have happened. And obviously these trades are negotiated beforehand, but if the Bears selection, maybe they heard something, it really pushed them to ensure that they traded up with the Jets. Again, even though it was 1 pick, it was probably, or honestly, no more, like you said, what happened with Penix and the Falcons selection at 8. Forced their hand and made them trade up just that one spot. And then Bo Nix to Denver, that quarterback room, like you said, guys that get a chance to make an immediate impact, like Bo Nix, I'd be shocked if he's not the starter day one there.
Oh yeah.
And we know he's going to have a weapon he's familiar with, because later on in the draft they picked this guy out of Oregon as well. And you know what? That's not a bad shot at all. You get Troy Franklin and Bo Nix together. There's already chemistry, so there's already something there in that young, now quarterback and wide receiver room. And yes, I'm going to say young. No jokes about Bo Nix and all that stuff. He's still relatively young. He's a rookie coming in.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting. I'm not saying Denver's going to win a lot. I don't think any of us will be saying that.
I mean,
but there's going to be something there to look at, to say the very least. And maybe could the Broncos leapfrog the Raiders in the division? We could at least say that. I mean, we're expecting the Chargers, if fully healthy, they should reascend back up the standings as well.
we expect that every year, though. I mean, I'm starting to get a little passive aggressively, just like, unhappy with the Chargers, because every year we expect them to be is better than they end up being, and they have Jim Harbaugh now. So
true, but to be fair though, Rick, now we're only expecting them to at least just be second in the division again.
I mean, still, but even that's like a little higher than expected. But I'll give it to you. That's probably fair.
True. So we have them, and now Michael Penix. Okay. What can I say? I don't understand if you're Atlanta. And to me, this was the pick that kept the offensive pieces going until 15 with the Colts, because the first 14 selections in this draft were either quarterback, wide receiver, or offensive tackle, and tight end at 13 ultimately. So like the first 14 picks in this draft, I don't know if that was a record or approaching one, but that's got to be pretty close. The first 14 selections all on the offensive side of the ball. Before the 15th overall pick is where we get the first defender. Then we start to get a little bit of a run with the defensive guys.
Yeah.
I just don't understand, if you're Atlanta, how you could do this and not expect, like I'm sorry, Kirk Cousins is not going to throw 35 touchdowns to 6 interceptions and win the MVP award like what happened with the Packers, because Kirk Cousins is not Aaron Rodgers. And if Michael Penix does become something like Jordan Love had a really good first season, like, all power to him. But I think, I don't think it's a stretch, and I don't think it's criticizing or being too negative saying that, okay, Jordan Love, great first season, now we need to see it again. I think it's more than fair to say we need to see Jordan Love have a follow-up campaign now. Because for what you want to say of, he learned for 3 years there, this, that, and the third, that was the first season where they actually saw him legitimately play and show more of his skills. Now we need to see his follow-up campaign is, I mean, we can't call it a sophomore slump because he's not a second-year player, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So for Atlanta to do this, and they explicitly said that what happened with the Packers was part of the mindset here. I'm sorry, just I don't get it. I don't get it, and I don't know if Justin is gonna, just to troll the two of us, try to play devil's advocate next week. I don't think he will. I think there's a lot of questions for Atlanta. Why would you follow this line of thinking? Like and you see the defensive players that ended up going, let's just say like through 15 to 20, or even the offensive line, because at 18 and 20 there were two offensive linemen that went over to the AFC North. But Dallas Turner, I was probably because I picked him in the mock, but I thought Turner or even Murphy or Verse was a shoo-in here.
Yeah.
You have veterans alongside that defensive line. You got to get a little bit younger at a high-end blue chip prospect, even if you didn't want to pick the kid from Alabama, which I know you're adverse to every once in a while. But even if you would have taken Murphy, right, to be the guy down the middle for the future, or Verse, who's now getting to go to the LA Rams, who, as we spoke about last week, each of us picked a hit for them for draft picks that could have gone in the first round in the redraft, Rick. They took two guys from last year in like the third and fourth round, or two third round picks, I think it was. Like, I don't understand for Atlanta how you don't bolster your team in a year where the division once again is wide open, because Tampa was all right, but it wasn't overwhelming what they did, right?
Yep.
They lost like two or three pieces from last year's team that ended up leaving. Like, New Orleans is New Orleans. Derek Carr is going to teach Spencer Rattler how to throw interceptions and yell at his teammates when it's not their fault.
Well, yeah,
and then the Panthers exist. It's kind of it.
Yeah, basically.
Like, I don't know. Like, that's just me. Like, I can't say I don't know what they were thinking, because they told us what they were thinking, but I don't understand how you could think that's a good idea for this team, the position it's in right now.
Well, I mean, if you looked at their quarterback room going into the draft this year, they only had two guys on their roster, which were Cousins and Heineke. So a quarterback was a necessity at some point, in this draft. And obviously, with the guys that went later on, one of those guys would have slotted into Atlanta and been the number 3, and it would have been fine, because, again, they got rid of Desmond Ridder. They don't have Logan Woodside anymore, so it made sense for them. And then the Falcons, they did make a few moves towards shoring up that defense. But, again, look at the second. They traded so much to get rookie Orahoro. And I love him out of Clemson. He's great, but that's a guy who I think we picked in like the late 90s, and he went like in the mid 30s. And the value there was just all over the place. I mean, then they added Braylon Trice, who's a really good player towards the end. But when you draft a quarterback at number 8, I mean, if you draft a quarterback in the late 20s, you can get away with saying, oh, he'll sit for a year, he'll sit for 2 years, and do that. But when you draft a quarterback at number 8, to have him sit for a year or two, that's a waste of a pick and a waste of money. And as you said, there were so many other avenues they could have gone. They could have gone with Dallas Turner or Jared Verse. At our mock draft, I had them picking Quinion Mitchell, which may have been a luxury pick, but you can always use more corners, especially in the NFC South, where the other teams that are there, yes, the Panthers exist, but they still have a quarterback who can throw the ball down the field. The Bucs won the division last year. Mike Evans is still there. You're still muted, but But
Evans and Godwin is what I said.
Evans and Godwin, of course, yeah, and then the Saints are there too, but Derek Carr can find somebody down the field. So having more secondary pieces wouldn't have hurt. It's just, here's the thing: Michael Penix on May 8th will turn 24 years old. He's going to be seated on the bench because he ain't supplanting Kirk Cousins in year 1, barring an injury. Maybe he supplants Taylor Heineke as the backup quarterback, which whatever. But again, he's not playing until maybe another year, another 2 years, because Cousins is on a 3-year deal. So you're telling me that if Cousins' deal runs out and he's there all 3 years and he's gone at the end, and Michael Penix takes over, he's 27 without having gotten into any meaningful games. Like, does the name Chris Weinke mean anything to you? That's basically what you got here. You got an older prospect. Unlike Bo Nix, who is going to start in week 1 probably, Penix isn't going to see the field at all unless it's like mop-up duty at this point. And yeah, I mean, look, great college player, threw for almost 14,000 yards in his career over 6 seasons because COVID year, but he wasn't the guy at 8. He just wasn't. There were so many other pieces to go. I would have even accepted them taking a wide receiver, taking Odunze at 8. They didn't need it, but that's a better luxury piece for them. But to take a quarterback this high when you have Cousins already there, and again, look, Kirk Cousins has played this the right way. Like, yeah, he was confused at the very beginning, but at least he talked to Penix, and we'll see. I believe Kirk Cousins will help mentor the kid, unlike Ryan Tannehill, that doofus in Tennessee who's no longer there anymore. But again, why? Again, like I said, when we did our mock draft, I had them taking Spencer Rattler in the 3rd round for the sole reason that is a guy who's going to sit for a year or two. Now in New Orleans, unfortunately, with Derek Carr, but he's going to sit for a year or two and figure things out. Jordan Travis of the Jets will sit for a year or two, heal up his ACL, obviously, and then figure it out. Michael Pratt in Green Bay will probably not see the field at all, but at least he'll learn from Jordan Love, who learned from Aaron Rodgers. But when you pick Penix at 8, you're basically saying, here, kid, here are the keys. Oh, wait, we already have a starting quarterback. So this is awkward. This is the awkward turtle in the room. This is the upside-down awkward turtle in the room, basically. It's just like, what are we doing? I think even Arthur Blank at that point was like, what? Like, why?
Yeah, and you saw Blank, like we see the video of Blank talking to the GM.
Did you see a left-handed quarterback named Michael? I think it was 2001 all over again. What's the deal here? So that went through a lot of people, and I think just justifiably so. But again, they tried to save face. Atlanta did, but that pick and then the trade they made for Ohoro is going to be what follows them in this draft. Because if it fails, those are the two pieces you have to look at, because then you give a lot for a defensive interior guy who may be the best thing coming, but again, you give so much for him. And the quarterback, when are you going to see him on the field?
Yeah, a draft like this can get a general manager fired if those first 2 pick/decisions don't go well.
And I was so hopeful because the Falcons had Raheem Morris come in. It was a totally new regime.
Yep.
And then just incompetency. It's almost like David Tepper was a spy in the room and told them to make the pick that they did.
It's something to say, because ultimately we wanted to have faith. We wanted to have the hope. Like, it would have been cool, the Falcons making it back into the postseason. And granted, were they probably going to end up being one and done because, oh no, it's the Eagles or the Cowboys in that wild card spot? Probably.
Well, I mean,
but it could have been interesting.
We said that about the Packers, and look what happened.
True. Well, true. To be fair, but I think ultimately, if you're Atlanta, if you're Falcons fans, I don't blame any Falcons fans that are still upset with the selection now a couple days later, because you have every right to, because you could have added, and even with the picks that you could say are maybe more luxury picks, let's not forget, time is ever going in this league. And Drake London's already been in the league for a couple of years. Kyle Pitts has already been in the league for a couple of years.
Yep.
Both one of those guys has to end up breaking out here at some point, definitively, and prove to be a part of the long-term future. I know it still would have been a head scratcher, but would you have necessarily been upset if they had picked Brock Bowers? Because then we know that means you reset the tight end. I know picking a tight end that high hasn't necessarily worked, but just the idea of Pitts, maybe he needs to go somewhere else and you just replace him. Or even, like you said, you mentioned Odunze, Rick. Put in Odunze there, and he can, if Drake London doesn't go the way we think he does, or if they think they won't be able to afford him in a few years' time, you could trade him after this. Those selections, I think you could justify as there's the guys that are there, they're going to come up on contract in a few years. Whereas this, you mentioned Cousins, he's on a 4-year deal.
Yep.
The first 3, I think all the guarantees are in the first 3 years. You're not going to see Penix for 3 years. You're just not, unless something terribly happens to Kirk Cousins.
Which happened last year, so he's reset the clock on his injury counters anyways. But to be fair, I honestly, in thinking about it more so, I think Brock Bowers would have made more sense here, because it would have given them a 2 tight end set to, do the thing they didn't do a lot last year, which was give Bijan Robinson the ball.
Yeah.
That would have made more sense. I mean, again, that's kind of what the Raiders at 13, it was like, well, you picked Michael Mayer last year and you signed Harrison Bryant, so why are you picking a tight end? But in reality, Brock Bowers played quarterback in high school, so maybe he's going to supplant Aiden O'Connell. You know,
Maybe.
maybe. And
Maybe.
and think about that. Brock Bowers as your quarterback. If he could just work on throwing the ball, that could be fun. Devontae Adams getting the throw from a 6'5", 250-pound quarterback.
Right.
Let's reset the clock there. But no, I think anywhere else probably would have been save the quarterback from the later round. Anywhere else would have been good for them. Would have made more sense for them to bring in somebody of that ilk. But yeah, it just didn't. It just doesn't sit right with me. It really doesn't because again, I understand you're bringing in Kirk Cousins who has this injury history, and I get that, but you know to not even tell him because that was the other rumor coming out. To not even tell him until they were on the clock and about to make the pick. Oh, hey, by the way, we're picking your successor. Like, I'm sorry, what? Huh? And again, I mean, this all goes back to Aaron Rodgers. Like, you feel for the guy because the Packers never picked a receiver for him in the first round until he was gone, basically. So, the Falcons, they bring in Kirk Cousins with all these weapons, and Rome Odunze is sitting right there, or Brock Bowers is sitting right there, and they're like, or even Fashanu or Fuaga, because to your point, Lindstrom and McGarry are getting older too.
Yeah.
That would have helped out their offensive line, but
Yeah.
they're like, nah, we'll go for this kid.
It's just one of those things where a lot of questions could be had, and once again, I'll repeat it. This is the kind of draft for a GM where if these first two picks, if it doesn't go well, it's not a good look. And even if Penix gets on the field early, that means that you gave $100+ million to a now injury-riddled quarterback. Like it's a lose-lose situation.
It is.
So it's just not great.
So-
Not great,
so
Bob.
Please to use an old school reference that I think you'll enjoy.
100%. So it's a lot. We're going to bring this conversation back up next week, I feel, because I'm sure we have opinions about the Falcons draft. At least one of us will have them, and I don't know if we'll call them as a winner necessarily for what they did. But let's move on from that and the quarterback discussion as a whole. Some of the other selections here early before we start to go a little bit deeper in. Cardinals, Marvin Harrison Jr., we expected this. I don't understand why people were thinking the Cardinals would entertain a trade. Kyler's there. They need Kyler to play well. They need a top-flight wide receiver, and they got the guy that they wanted. Maybe there was people trying to make the conversation at the end, should the Cardinals maybe consider Neighbors over Harrison Jr.? No. It was Maserati Marv was always going to go fourth overall, so he goes. The Chargers and Giants was kind of a very interesting inflection point because at this point, we can I mean, I know the pick's already been made, but we assumed that earlier in the hour or so, the Giants, or probably earlier in the day, the Giants and Patriots, they had the discussions, and the Patriots flat out said no. So the Giants are operating with, okay, we're just going to keep this pick, and we're going to draft based off who the Chargers get. I think, I don't know if I sent it to you guys, and maybe I retweeted it, but there was a funny, stick figure thing that Chargers fans were making, where it's basically the strategy of depending on who they draft. It's either Herbert staying upright and throwing it to Johnson, who doesn't catch it, or Herbert barely gets the ball off, or doesn't get the ball off at all because it's only one good offensive lineman there. So clearly, and with Jim Harbaugh there, Jim Harbaugh believes in the trenches. So they go Joe Alt at 5th overall, do the Chargers, and that frees up Malik Neighbors to go 6th overall to the Giants. I think it made sense. I think the Giants were always going to hit at either tackle or receiver, and I think the Cardinals and the Chargers, especially the Chargers, were the two teams that were going to affect what they were doing there no matter what. I have no bones to make about either of those picks. I think both picks make sense, and I think Herbert, while you could have your questions about the wide receiving core of the Chargers right now, and it's fair to ask the questions definitively. They did, I don't want to say make up for it necessarily, but they do pick a kid later on in the draft that you have a lot of hope for, a lot of faith for. And I just think going forward, I don't think we should necessarily discount if the Chargers are a competitive enough team. Maybe they get active at the trade deadline to take a receiver from a middling team, or even just look forward to next year's free agency. I'm not saying the Chargers are going to do anything immediate, but to me, this just means that in the future, they're going to be active in the wide receiver market, whichever way it comes about, whether it be with a trade or free agency. Well, I don't think Jim Harbaugh's a guy that's just going to settle.
Well, so here's the question, though, for the Chargers going forward here, because you drafted Joe Alt, who is a monster, and who is going to be your starting left tackle. No question about it at 6'9". The problem is you already have a left tackle in Rashawn Slater. So one of those guys has to move to an unnatural position at right tackle. Now, Can you teach somebody to go from left tackle to right tackle? Yeah, but look at how that's worked out for certain players in the New York area, like a Mekhi Becton or an Eric Flowers. Hasn't really worked very well for them. Even an Evan Neal hasn't really worked out well for them because the psychology is different, really. Left tackle, you've got the blind side there, and the right tackle, you've probably got the best edge rusher on the field to deal with. So you can kind of get away with being a little less aggressive at the left tackle because, if you're larger like Joe Alt is, you're going to probably be fine. But, as you said, it turned out to be a deeper wide receiver class than I think we were expecting because the Chargers added not just one piece in the second round, but they also added the Jerry Rice's kid. So, now you've got QJ,
Yep.
Lad McConkey, and Brendan Rice there, which I think is a pretty good trio of receivers there for them. But I know Giants fans were, I think, disappointed because I think they wanted Alt to fall to them. I think everyone kind of bought into the rumors the Chargers were trading out of this pick for somebody who wanted McCarthy, like the Vikings.
Right.
That would have left Joe Alt right there for the Giants. And again, look, the Giants haven't had a 1,000-yard receiver since Beckham in 2018. And Malik Neighbors has that potential, but Daniel Jones coming off of an injury, your offensive line, Andrew Thomas is good, but Evan Neal is not. We know this for a fact. Search your feelings, you know it to be true. And it's just like that's the one thing for the Giants that I'm gonna knock them for is that they didn't address the offensive line at all, really. Because you got John Runyon in free agency. That's all well and good. But at the same point in time, again, like you said, those guys get older. And what did we see last year with J.C. Hassenauer? He didn't even make it. He was the big signing from the Steelers who's going to be their starting center. Didn't even make it out of training camp. And what did they have to do? They started the rookie John Michael Schmitz as their center.
Yep.
A position of leverage going to a rookie, unless your name's Jerkins, it doesn't really work out very well for you. So, you got two of them now.
Sure.
So, look, yes, Malik Neighbors is the weapon the Giants have needed as long as he can stay on the field and not be like Odell Beckham. And again, here's another thing that I don't think we're counting on. He's going to need shoulder surgery at some point in the future. This is something that is documented that he does have a stinger in that shoulder that it's not affecting how he's playing right now, but it will come up in the future. So you're basically giving this guy a 4-year contract with a 5th-year option, and in maybe year 2 or 3, he's going to have shoulder surgery, miss some time. So, that's the risk you run right there. I think Odunze might have been a better pick because I'm a guy, and you know this, I'm a guy who likes taller receivers and taller corners. Odunze is 3 inches taller than he is and just has a better personality and a vibe, I think. He would have been the toast of New York at this point. Malik Neighbors, he can be good, but again, there's a lot of off-the-field questions that I have. And again, the Giants did not address a position of need, which was the line.
Yep.
And I think that may come back to bite them. It's like, sure, you in the undrafted free agency class, you got a lineman. Congratulations, but you had plenty of guys there. If you were spooked by J.C. Latham, I get it because Alabama that burned you once is going to burn you twice. But you had Fuaga there, you had Fashanu there, you had other guys who could have helped you out, and even as we saw him fall, JPJ could have been a really nice position. Because again, I think the Raiders are also looking at him more as a guard prospect too, which I mean, he's talented. But yeah, the 5 and 6, like we said, that's kind of where things were interesting because it also affected 7 too. Because the Titans were dead set on Joe Alt because they didn't think the Chargers were gonna keep the pick.
Right.
The Giants weren't going to go for him. So the Titans were dead set on Joe Alt. And what's your backup plan? The guy from Alabama.
Yeah.
Well, could have happened to a worse franchise.
So it's going to be very interesting to see how all that plays out for those teams. And I think it'll be interesting. I think Neighbors will be the next Giants receiver to get 1,000 finally. I think the question will just be, will it be Daniel Jones that's doing that? That's doing the gunslinging for him? Or are the Giants going the alternative method and just build up everything else before they finally get lucky? There's another Manning coming in the next few years here, Rick.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but I was going to say Drew Lock could be the guy to, be the guy. So
maybe. Hey, but get the sleeve back on him and Let's see what old buddy can do. Shooter sleeve Drew Lock, legend,
Yeah.
absolute legend in the NFL game
Mhm.
over the last half decade. So we've talked a lot about early. Rick, I wish Justin was here. Maybe we'll get more into the depth of the draft class itself. Let's just talk about maybe the first round pick, or if you want to talk about the other picks as well, you can. But yeah,
Yeah.
newly rechristened, born again Jets fan is the
Yes.
Podfather, and you guys go offensive lineman with the first pick, and you gave your thoughts about the Jets draft that the early picks. I forget if I don't think you put an exact number, but your early round grades for the Jets a lot higher than the later round grades for the Jets.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that with the Jets specifically, Rick. They do the little one slot swap with the Vikings, and the Vikings get their guy. And obviously for the Jets, I don't know if it impacted them necessarily. I think obviously they would have wanted one of the wide receivers to fall to them. But when they realized that, maybe that even incentivized them to get the deal done definitively because they probably figured that with Neighbors gone at 6, it's like, okay, well, Adunze's not going to make it to us. And clearly Atlanta was not going to trade out because they got the guy that they really wanted. So the Jets make this pick. Or the Jets make the swap, make the pick, and they go from there. What were your thoughts about the Jets' strategy on, especially in round one?
I mean, I liked it. I think it was an interesting move by them to kind of go back by one because we this is the thing that we talk about and we sort of kind of leave it in the back, but then we kind of talk about it again. The amount of money from the 10th pick to the 11th pick that you're guaranteeing a player is significant for a franchise that owes Aaron Rodgers $100+ million this season alone. So, I thought that was a smart move by them. I think they could have fleeced Minnesota for a little more than just the 11th pick, but they got a later round pick that they traded to Carolina because that's where all the picks go to die is Carolina. And then so the pick of Fashanu, I really like, and I'll tell you why. Because yes, Max Mitchell can be a really good tackle, but Morgan Moses and Tyron Smith are both 33 years old. So basically, you drafted Fashanu to be the 4th tackle right now, but that next year he's going to be the number 1. Like, this is a guy who is a beast. 6'6", 312, played high school ball with Caleb Williams, so he knows how to protect a really good quarterback. I'd say that through gritted teeth because Caleb Williams is a really good quarterback. But I mean, this is a guy who I think is going to be a mauler and is really going to help them out. And even even if he's not ready right away, again, you have Moses and you have Smith, you have Mitchell, you have other tackles that are there, so he doesn't have to go in right away like Becton did all those years ago because Mekhi Becton really just bombed out. So that's kind of where you're hoping this is more the DeBrickashaw Ferguson mold than the Mekhi Becton mold. And I think it will be. I think Fashanu's got a lot of good pieces, and then he's got some things he's got to work on. But all linemen do when they transition from the college game to the program, they got to work on their footwork or work on their hands. Work on their speed. You got to work on all those things. So that makes sense there too. I did say in the text that I sent, the early picks were an A+. I love Fashanu. Malachi Corley has a really good opportunity here to be a star. But as a born-again Jets fan, let me just tell you about 3 guys that were mid-round wide receivers that we thought could have been good. Jeremy Curley out of TCU, Stephen Hill out of Georgia Tech, Ardarius Stewart out of Alabama. The third one, why he failed. But the other, Curley had the best career out of the 3 of them, but when you take a mid-round receiver like that, it's tricky, especially Corley. At the very least, they gave him a weapon. The Ryan Rodgers a weapon. And he could be a really good player, but let's see. I'm holding reservations on that end. It's a great pick, but let's see how he pans out. Later picks. Why do you take 2 running backs in the same round or in a 30-pick span? Obviously Breece Hall's had his injury history. Izzy Abanikanda is still there too. They've got a good opportunity here to have a few more running backs in there, but aren't Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis basically the same guy? They kind of run the same.
The Spider-Man meme right there. That's
you. Justin nailed the Jordan Travis pick, and I really like it too. I think that he's got time, which is all that he needs. And he's going to sit behind Aaron Rodgers and Tyrod Taylor and be really, really good in the future. But again, heal up that ACL kid. And then Mr. Irrelevant, you have all these opportunities to pick a really good Mr. Irrelevant, and you go for the most relevant school in all of college football, Mr. Irrelevant. Like, why? And it's a safety. Don't we have Chuck Clark? Don't we have Tony Adams? Why?
There's always depth to be had.
Well, again, as a born-again Jets fan, Alabama secondary players, D. Milner popped into my head immediately, and I was like, oh, great. This guy again. So, but I will say this, though. The story of Quantez Stiggers is a phenomenal one. And I hope that he makes the team and can play really well, because this seems like a guy who is going to work his butt off to get onto the field, from the Fan Control Football League to the CFL, where he started with the Argonauts, to getting picked in the 5th round by the Jets. If he's a guy who can make the field and can really make an impact, this is the potential to be a phenomenal story, more than just getting drafted. So, Like I said, A+ at the beginning, C in the end, because why 2 running backs and why a guy from Alabama at the end?
Why the backs and why Bama? It'll be interesting to say, at the very least. It'll be interesting to see. And I definitely can't wait for Justin's reaction. Probably some similar takes next week when it comes to talking about the Jets.
Oh, please. Justin will be like, I liked every pick they took.
Like the pick, like the stories. Everything's great. Justin with the Jets is going to be a Tony Khan at a press conference.
Oh, God.
So let's go a little bit later. Finally, I mentioned the wide receivers. Saints taking a wide receiver. Saints taking an offensive lineman at 14. We mentioned Brock Bowers going to Vegas as tight end / maybe quarterback of the future at 13. And finally, the defensive players start to go off the board. With Latu going to the Colts at 15, Byron Murphy the second at 16, and the Vikings trading up in the draft. So they trade up twice, Rick, and they get Dallas Turner out of Alabama. They trade with the Jacksonvilles. I should call them that. With the Jaguars, who ended up taking Brian Thomas Jr. I want to talk about focusing on Minnesota. Minnesota was very aggressive. Did you expect, Rick, for the Vikings? I mean, I know we were talking about them trading up, but did you expect them to be the most aggressive team basically in the first round in the draft? They trade up not once but twice.
You mean the Fraud Kings?
The Fraud Kings, yes. The Fraud Kings, the fake Nordic Vikings.
Well, let's talk about how aggressive they were to trade up to 17, because Jacksonville fleeced them for this. It was the 23rd pick, a 5th round pick this year, a 3rd rounder and a 4th rounder next year for this one pick.
Right.
Jaguars fleeced them. Like, I'm sorry. I guess I could see the writing on the wall, because, if they waited for Brian Thomas at 23, he might have been gone by that point, because I'm sure that a team, above them might have wanted to take him before then. Or maybe the Jaguars wanted to take him, which they ended up taking him at 23. So the Jags moved down 6 picks and probably got their guy. The Vikings, look, one of the things that we've talked about with this team year in and year out has been the fact that they've had massive holes on defense. The year they went 13-4, what was the big thing was that, this is a team that has, a great offense, or a good offense, I should say, but a very lackluster defense. And so what did we see again? A good offense, but a lackluster defense. And so what do they do in free agency and in the draft? They basically ran roughshod. I think I see 6 or 7 new linebackers that don't have jerseys yet, and 3 or 4 defensive linemen. So the plan was to rebuild the defense, but I think, look, Dallas Turner's got top 10 potential, and I think he could be a very good player for them. But this is another case where this is the draft that's going to be interesting for me to look at as possibly a loser come next year, because you give so much to get this kid, and that's all well and good. But if he doesn't perform to the up to the level that you want him to, was it all worth it in the end? And again, if you look at the rest of their draft from this year, nothing about it really screams out to you.
They went all in on their first 2 selections.
Yeah. And then they traded time and time again, it seems, in the if you go to their Wikipedia page for the 2024 season and you go to their draft, they have a footnote that goes down to K. C, D, E, all the way down to K. That's no. Like, why are you trading so much?
Many trades were made, ladies and gentlemen,
You're
when it came to
bartering like
these
the
stuff
old
like
Vikings used to.
well, no, old Vikings used to just come in, pillage, and then leave.
Well, sure. I mean, that's fine.
They didn't pillage Jacksonville for this.
That's
But
true.
no, so Dallas Turner, the youngster, going to be 21 years old throughout the entirety of the season. So very young defensive lineman that they add into the fold,
Yep.
going there. And like we kind of mentioned, just going in all in with these two selections. Very interesting to see what the competition in the NFC North breeds. Of course, the Chicago Bears with their 2 first-round picks that they make going quarterback and wide receiver. The Green Bay Packers later in the first round end up getting Jordan Morgan, which got mixed reactions, I think, to say the very least. And the Detroit Lions as well with the selection they made with Terry and Arnold in the first round. So the NFC North getting maybe a little bit interesting going into next year. I don't know. We'll see. But it could be something to say the very least. Kind of looking at the rest of the first round, let's talk a little bit about the wide receivers here, Rick. We just made reference to it, but Brian Thomas Jr. ended up going to Jacksonville. Maybe the guy that Jacksonville wanted all along,
Yep.
as far as we know. They pick him. The Kansas City Chiefs go wide receiver, and man, oh man, a lot of people were just like, oh, of course they get the guy, Xavier Worthy, very talented kid coming out of Texas, and a lot of people. It was dread for a lot of people with that selection, man.
But it's not even that. It's they traded up with the Bills.
Yeah, that's the bigger story.
Buffalo, what are you doing?
Yeah, right next.
Why are you helping Kansas City do anything?
Yep.
At this point,
and the Bills were very active the first 2 nights of the draft.
I was going to say, if you're telling me that the only reason why this trade happened was because Taylor Swift promised to play at Highmark Stadium in a couple of years, fine, I get it, but why? Why else would you do this? To go down to the second round to get Keon Coleman, good and all, I understand that, but even then, you traded up with the Chiefs, trade up with the Cardinals at 27. Why? Why then? Why then?
Yeah, that was the big one, to say the very least. Why did you pick them? And then, as we know, as you just mentioned it, the Bills then made a couple follow-up trades, trading with the Carolina Panthers out of the last spot of the first round, getting the first pick of the second round, which they used to select Keon Coleman. Not the only wide receiver selection that they made, to say the very least. But let's talk about wide receivers, because from the Chiefs picks, let's go from the Chiefs pick to that, not even just the Bills pick, to the second pick of the second round, where's the Chargers. So 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, and 34. In those 7 selections, 5 wide receivers go, especially from 31 to 34, 4 straight. And you kind of mentioned this was a lot deeper of a draft than we expected. And I think a lot more guys, I think some names that we necessarily didn't hit at in our mock right away ended up going. Ricky Pearsall going to the 49ers, going to be a developmental guy. As we now going through the weekend, they end up keeping Deebo Samuel and Brendan Ayuk, which a lot of people were wondering if one of those two were going to get traded, which me personally, I didn't see the trade happening at the draft. I figured if the decision was going to be made, I always figured post-draft, because I feel like if you're the Niners, future picks would be the way at this point, not just current. I feel like you've done all your scouting for the current year. Are these picks, how much is it going to help you? I feel like it would have been next year, but that could just be me. Xavier Legette going to the Carolina Panthers, and then we mentioned him before, Ladd McConkey going to the Chargers at 34. So 4 straight wide receivers go there, and we'll kind of start to be a little bit, every so often a wide receiver was going just for a brief period of time, because then Jalen Polk goes to the Patriots at 37.
Yep,
and that's a pretty popular choice. And then as we get later into the second round, we get a mini run on corners, Rick. 4 straight corners go in the second round, which starts with our guy, Cooper DeJean, 40th overall to the Philadelphia Eagles. Rick, I gotta say, I was shocked, because at 42nd overall, Kamari went to the Texans. I had Georgia corner written all over it in our mock, at least Georgia defensive back, not just corner in general. But the Eagles didn't pick a Georgia player in the first 2 rounds, Rick. I
know.
Is something happening in Philly? Should the Eagles be concerned going into the season, Rick?
Well, so that's the thing, is that it's possible that maybe maybe Nick Sirianni's relationship with Kirby Smart has fallen apart a little bit. So clearly the scouting relationship hasn't worked, because they took 2 guys from Clemson in this draft too. Don't forget later on. So that was interesting there. So maybe he's playing hairs with Dabo instead. You never know. But let's talk about the last couple of picks there, because when you get down to like the last four picks in the first round, those are
Yeah.
the teams that realistically were the teams that were conference championship runners up and Super Bowl runner up and Super Bowl champion most of the time. So what you're looking for there in those last four picks are guys that can help you because you were one step away from winning. And so the one step away that you think you needed is the guy you want to pick here. So let's go through that for a second. Let's go 29. The Cowboys had the pick from Detroit, Tyler Guyton. Yes, they needed that because again, offensive line was the big thing for them. They lost Tyler Baez in free agency. No Tyron Smith. Zach Martin's older. They need a little bit more, and Guyton's a guy who can slide in and play whatever. So good pick on that side there. Baltimore at 30, Nate Wiggins, corner. Yeah, because again, that secondary has been beset by injuries year in and year out over the past couple of years. And so to get a guy like Nate Wiggins, who I really like coming out of this draft, just to give them more depth, because, Marlon Humphrey, Jalen Armour Davis, Kyle Hamilton, you need a little more depth because you never know what the injury bug is going to bite them like it has in the past year. San Francisco at 31, Ricky Pearsall, the wide receiver. I suppose, I don't really know where I would have gone if I was the Niners, because I feel like, again, you lose in overtime in the Super Bowl, you're clearly there, but like, where was their deficiency? Maybe a linebacker, but the thing is, Edgerrin Cooper wasn't going to be. He was taken 45th. He was not a first round pick per se. So, Junior Colson, not a first round pick. Good linebackers, but this year's linebacking class was not as deep as you thought. So that kind of was just where I thought, because again, when Greenlaw got hurt in the Super Bowl, we were running on the field, then tearing his ACL by the turf monster, that changed the whole complexion of the game. So that's kind of where I thought they would go. But to add another weapon to the offense, I think stoked those flames further about Ayuk or Samuel going, but it didn't happen that way. So Pearsall there, he's a project. He could be a good receiver, but he'll probably be lower on the depth chart. And then Carolina with Xavier Legette. Look, this is it's a gadget guy. It's a speed guy, but it's not a number one guy. And I think that's what Carolina needs, is they need a number one wide receiver. They don't have that. They've got a bunch of number twos. Xavier Legette is going to be a number two again. So
at best, realistically, like he might only be a number three.
Right, at best. So, or a good kickoff specialist, because now they're putting the new kickoff rules, so maybe he'll be there instead. But whatever. But let's look at it like in the lens of Kansas City, going back and pick to 28. Xavier Worthy for them, absolutely. Like they, one of the things that helped out for the Chiefs last year was that Patrick Mahomes was so good at finding random people that you had, forgotten all about. But to put it bluntly, they needed to upgrade the wide receiver room, which is why they got Hollywood Brown in the offseason. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to take Xavier Worthy over Kadarius Toney or Richie James at any given, schoolyard pickup. Like I'm going to take Xavier Worthy all day. So it gives them a Tyreek Hill comp, because he's got that ability. And when Mahomes, like the Chiefs in the regular season weren't the Chiefs because they didn't have that. They didn't have those guys. But now you've got Brown and Worthy to go along with Mr. Taylor Swift, and obviously, that's kind of the way things are going to go there. It just rebuilds what they had, and so, yeah, I like that. And again, Buffalo traded down. Keon Coleman's a good pick because they needed a wide receiver, but again, to trade down a bunch just signals they didn't really know what they were doing, or they didn't want the guy, or that they were willing to move around, but like. Incidentally, Keon Coleman, I'm sure you saw this in our Twitter, this press conference. Macy's, get him a sponsorship deal ASAP.
A couple of these wide receivers with some fun, because I saw Leggett for the Panthers, like they made a comment about like his deep Southern drawl that he has at his opening presser. And then it was either Polk or no, I don't think it was Polk. I think it was another wide receiver, because the Patriots doubled down on later round wide receivers. I think they picked the kid out of UCF. And he said something along the lines of like he's going to be so like electric and exciting that people with wheelchairs are going to jump out.
Javon Baker said that. Yeah,
yes.
Which it has the potential to be really good, but also has the potential to be like, dude, why did you say that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Well,
why?
I think the only reason it will just be if he doesn't become if he's not an exciting player. So there's expectation now to say the very least. But yeah, but going back to the Xavier Worthy selection here, Rick, just to give my final thoughts about that. In 3 years of college, over 2,700 yards, 26 touchdowns for him in his career. Made All Big 12 team all 3 seasons he was in college, and was also the Big 12 Offensive Freshman of the Year. And in that conference, to win Offensive Freshman of the Year, that's no small feat because the Big 12 can be known for. There a lot of offensive production is there. So
Yeah.
they're getting a guy like you said, their Tyreek Hill replacement. Even if they get him to what 50-60% of what Tyreek Hill was. Like
Yeah.
pretty good. I mean, just talent and not in terms of production. Obviously, they'd like a little bit more than just 50% of the production with the first round pick.
Yeah.
As we continue to go, I made the joke earlier with them not picking a Georgia player here, Rick, but let's look at the Eagles just very briefly. They go Quinion Mitchell and Cooper. And I think I had the Eagles picks, and that's my Georgia selection in the Armaka side. Like, I kind of mentioned that if you're the Eagles, kind of similar to what San Fran is, it's not that they're infallible, especially with how they ended last season, but there's a lot there in Philly. Like, were any of these selections going to overtake someone already starting on that team? It was going to be very dependent on where the players were taken. And
Yeah.
I kind of did what I expected. They just went with depth, and they went with 2 corners who these kids are going to learn from Big Play Slay and James Bradbury for a year. Hopefully they learn, not to hold someone's jersey in the fourth quarter. But
Yeah.
these 2 kids are just going to learn this entire season for the under those 2. Of course, they're going to play a little bit from the Eagles. Maybe if I had to guess, maybe Mitchell's the one to get a little bit more time, maybe in like 3 corner sets or whatever. But I think ultimately, the 2 pretty good picks for Philly, if we're being honest here, just bolstering depth and that eventual thing is now that they've paid Jalen Hurts, like contracts are going to be shed. You have 2 corners, you're probably going to lose one of them this time next season.
Yeah.
You got 2 corners developing now. I think that was pretty solid right there by Philadelphia. Good, nice, tidy business for the Eagles to say the very least. And real quick as well, Jonathan Brooks, you had him tabbed to Dallas. Carolina nabbed him up. What a what was? Did you feel bad for him going to Carolina? It's like, we're so
Always. I'm always going to feel bad for a guy going to Carolina because he doesn't deserve to go to Carolina in that aspect there. I mean, does it really speak to the fact that they're not sold on Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders? I guess, but that it is what it is at this point. I think they're looking for the next Jonathan Stewart or Stephen Davis, and Jonathan Brooks is a very good running back. He's just got injury history, and oddly enough, the one like I said with the Giants, the one thing that the Panthers didn't really address was the offensive line. So that means that Ike Ekwonu in his 3rd year had better be better than he was in his 2nd year, because otherwise it's going to be another rough season for Carolina. And do they have their first round pick in 25?
Yes, they do.
Right now.
They do.
Now you mean for now?
For now.
Yeah. I mean, look, I was surprised that Brooks went a little higher than I thought he was going to, because running backs weren't rated that highly in this draft. But he's a good player. If he's healthy, he's a very good player for them. So, and I want to give one quick shout out as like a sneaky kind of thing that I didn't think about, but the more I thought about it, the more I liked the Tampa Bay in the first round, taking Graham Barton.
Right.
Because Ryan Jensen was hurt a lot last year.
Yeah.
So now they've got, and Barton was a guard at Duke, but he can play center.
Yeah.
And so now you've got a guy who can kind of learn in that mold there too, which I think was a really good pick for them. Him going a little higher than Jackson Powers Johnson was a surprise to me, but I guess it's a reverse, right? Barton was a guard in college. He's not going to be a center. JPJ was a center in college.
He's going to be a guard. Yep.
This is kind of where that all went down there. But yeah, like I said, I think Tampa did a very, very nice job with their draft picks, in this as well. Very clean for them. They got some good pieces on the defense. They got some good speed on the offense towards later rounds. And again, all headlined by Graham Barton, the brand new center for the next hopefully decade in Tampa. So if you're Baker, you gotta be feeling pretty good about that, because the Bucs put you back in a position to win what has become, thanks to the draft that we've seen from the other 3 teams, a very winnable division again, a very winnable again.
Once again. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to say to the very least, and maybe Tampa. I wanted to believe in Atlanta this year, man. Just like you did last year, but they ruined it.
Yeah,
You blew it, Atlanta. You
yeah,
blew it. Let's go. I know I mentioned the NFC North as a whole. Let's focus in on Detroit a little bit here. What did you think of their picks, Rick? They go corner on both of their first two selections. I think it made a lot of sense ultimately because this was a team that, geez, they lost a lot of quarterbacks
yeah,
over the last like season plus.
yep.
CJGJ leaving, he's a corner slash safety hybrid, but he ends up leaving. Veterans on that team gone. It really just, and I talked about last year when it came to our thoughts about the NFC North, that the Lions defense, it's more of like they're better as a whole than the sum of its parts.
Mhm.
They needed to get new parts in there because they needed some talent. And, in the first round, because they made the trade with Dallas, they get Terry and Arnold, the corner out of Alabama, with the 24th pick. And then later on to the back end of the second round, 61st pick, they get Ennis Rakestraw Jr. I loved him coming out of this draft. With one of our mock draft picks. So I think two good picks right there. It's going to be very interesting, Rick, because I feel like one of, if not both of them, are going to play significant early. Arnold's going to be one of the top two corners coming into the season. I don't think that's a question. And Rakestraw is probably just a good preseason and some plays away from being the next guy. So what do you think about Detroit going into the season? Let's just say one of them for now is going to be starting at a relatively young. They lose CJGJ, so you have I don't want to say the lesser experienced safety, but you don't have the same starting group you had last year. You're going to have a lot of new faces in the secondary in a division where the Bears made massive additions at the wide receiver room, right? With Keenan Allen on the trade into Dunze, with the Green Bay Packers, who are hoping that some of those young receivers, these guys got to take a leap in year 3, right? Jordan Love had a solid season without necessarily Christian Watson there. Can they take that next step with the squad that they have? And I make jokes about them, of course, and I will continue to do so. But the Minnesota Vikings, bar none, have the best individual skill position player in that division in Justin Jefferson.
Yep.
Now, will he be a Minnesota Viking for much longer? It's a question. But they have the best individual skill position player in the division. What do you make of Detroit as of now? Obviously, we need to let the offseason go. We'll wait to see, as we get closer to our division previews, what how much more solidified the depth chart will be. But with two young corners coming into the secondary, your thoughts about those selections by Detroit and how these guys are going to have to step up for them going in very early in 2024.
Well, the Lions, again, they were a team that, like we said, were a step away. And what was the difference between them getting to the Super Bowl from losing the conference championship game? It was the fact that in the second half of that game against the Niners, their defense collapsed. And their defense collapsed, because they were using borrowed time. Like, they were getting Kindle Vildor, like, a lot of big plays. And he's not really – he's like a fifth corner. He's not a third corner, really. So they needed a little more depth there at that position. Again, they lost CJGJ, but it's also they lost Khalil Dor. They lost Chase Lucas as well. Was a big loss. But they added Carlton Davis in free agency. So now you've got Carlton Davis, who's like your corner one, and you add guys like Arnold and Sione Vaki in later rounds and Rakestraw. I like Ennis Rakestraw too. I really think he's going to be a big guy. But also they use the pipeline because Terry and Arnold was a year removed from Brian Branch, and you saw how that worked in this round. I can understand if you're the Lions, maybe you think you want to add another piece on offense, but to be fair, like the skill positions on offense, you're good. Laporta's an A-plus tight end. Your wide receiver room has Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams. Maybe you wanted to add a third receiver there, but just didn't really need to. And your running backs are great too. So I like what they did by adding a couple of offensive linemen in the later rounds. Giovanni Manu from University of British Columbia is a monster, but he's got to learn how to play the position properly. And then Christian Mahogany is a very good interior guard from BC, the other BC, Boston College. So British Columbia and Boston College. But to the point of the corners, again, the Lions knew what they needed to do in order to compete again with the rising division that you have and be a force in the NFC. You got to shore up that defense. You got to give yourself more, lack of a better term, more bullets in the chamber to have against a wide receiver crew like an Ayuk and a Samuel, because you're going to see them again at some point in the playoffs. The Eagles are going to get healthier with Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, so they're going to see them there. Cowboys still have CeeDee Lamb for now. And, the Giants now with Jalen Hyatt and Malik Neighbor, I'm using this as an example. But again, go through the rest of that comp of the NFC. You got some really tough wide receiver cores there. And if you can have corners match up with them like the Lions have, you can shut down some of these offenses. So I like that this was the idea that they had. They didn't do anything too flashy because
Right.
they knew what they were going to do. They knew what was the point they were trying to make. And so I can't fault them for it. I mean, again, going corner on back-to-back picks is a little questionable, but I don't fault the talent of Arnold or Rakestraw. I think they're both gonna have impacts from day one, week one, in this season coming up.
Yep. Rick, what did you make of the Miami Dolphins? Chop Robinson in the first round and Patrick Paul in the second round.
Another case where the Dolphins knew what they needed going into this season with Chop Robinson going to that squad, because again, it all fell apart for them at the end of the year because their defense just got hurt.
Yeah.
And now you bring back Chubb and Tyndall, and you add a guy like Chop Robinson, Jalen Phillips too. You have him there. It shores up that defense because again, the rest of the squad, it was pretty good. I mean, and Patrick Paul is a good piece for them, because again, after Terran Armstead, who's your next tackle? Jack Driscoll? I mean, okay. Austin Jackson, all right, So Patrick Paul's a very good piece for them. And I think the main key for them is not only keeping Tua healthy, but keeping that defense healthy, or at least having enough respectable bench players to rotate through to be able to get you in the spot. And Chad Robinson's going to be a nightmare. He's got a lot of speed to him at 6'3", 254. He's got a really good motor. Is he going to be your every down guy? Probably not in the very beginning because, again, you have so much talent and depth in the linebacking room. But he's going to make an impact at this season at some point or another because, again, you rotate him out with Chubb and Tyndall. You give them like plays off here and there because you want to save them because this is a boom or bust year for Miami. Like this is it because they have all that talent. In the past 2 years, they've had all that talent, and just the results haven't been there because of one reason or another. A couple years ago with the run they had, but then it all fell apart at the end because Tua got hurt. Skylar Thompson started the playoff game. You can remember that.
Yep.
And then this past year, and it was all because they stupidly didn't take Bradley Chubb out of the game and saved him from season-ending injury.
Yep.
The offense failed to show up in Kansas City in like sub-zero weather, which you didn't fail to show up in sub-zero weather too in Kansas City or in Kansas City in general. You didn't fail to show up there in general. So, but yeah, I think they did the right thing. Those picks were very good for them. These teams that were later, they stuck to what they knew. They stuck to what they needed. They didn't do anything too crazy or too fancy. They made the right moves for them to supplement their already talented rosters, as it were.
Yep. I agree. And I think Patrick Paul, Loki, I think he might have a chance to challenge late in the training camp and preseason to being one of the starters. I think there's an avenue because the Dolphins have continuously been drafting offensive linemen over the last couple of years.
Yep.
And we saw one of their offensive linemen leave in Hunt in the offseason. He had some good seasons, and he ends up getting paid he was solid, and he gets paid like a very good offensive lineman by the Carolina Panthers. So boom, we loop back Carolina into the conversation. Just for just for that. But no, I think Patrick Paul, like he's very good. He goes 55 overall. I don't think he's necessarily a project. Like it wouldn't surprise me if at least maybe a couple games into the season he could be starting for them. It really wouldn't surprise me.
Well, he's also a big guy too. He's 6'7". That's a big guy that you want on the other side of the line with Terran Armstead on one side and him on the other because give Tua as much time as he needs and maybe give him the Guardian cap because you need those two.
Rick, Houston Texans, they didn't have a first-round pick with the trades they made, but it just felt like you talk about teams that knew what they wanted to do. Houston, like kind of similar with some of these teams. I think similar to Detroit, they attack the secondary. They go with Kamari Lasister with 42nd overall pick, and then they go with the safety out of USC that you were very high on in our mock draft. With their third-round pick. And I think in between it, I think it was an offensive lineman that they also added. Yes, Blake Fisher out of Notre Dame that they added into the fold. So just a lot of, just going about their business, Houston. Like, the impact these kids can make, who knows? But just the Texans, Rick, with each move Houston makes to me, I keep having more confidence in them going into this season. Like, I really think Houston is building a case here once we get to our season previews. Like we know kind of how probably the division's going to go. I'm saying in terms of the landscape of the AFC, Houston, if they can hit their ceiling this season,
or
even next year, that's a team that could shift the balance of power in the conference.
Well, they're going to need to, because just looking at their opponents this year, they've got I think the hardest schedule of any team that I've ever seen. Because not only you probably know 6-0 in division. Let's call it what it is here, probably. But then you got the AFC East,
Yeah.
which the Jets, the Bills, the Dolphins. Then you have the NFC North, who we just talked about, all had a very good draft. And then your three of random opponents are Baltimore, Kansas City, and Dallas. So if you're the Texans, you had to do the right thing and not swing on the fences too hard, because you needed the best pieces possible to shore up what you needed. Again, they didn't need a wide receiver because they got Stephon Diggs. They didn't need that. They didn't need a real running back. They got a guy later on who maybe went a little too high for everyone's liking, but Kamari Lassiter has a chance to be a really solid corner for them. And yeah, Kalen Bullock I was very high on. So him going to the Texans, he can learn from Jimmy Ward and from Lonnie Johnson that's there. He'll turn into a very good safety. It is weird, though, to say the Texans did something right, in the draft. It's very weird. I mean, again, this is 2 years in a row they've hit, because last year was Stroud and Anderson.
Yep.
They've hit 2 years in a row. They've turned the corner. Now, if only Atlanta could do the same thing.
No, yeah, if only. Rick, in the mock site we used, which was phenomenal, we unfortunately did not get to make the full 100 picks because the site ran out after 99. I don't know. They didn't program the 100th pick there. The 100th pick to end the third round in this draft, we're going back to the Commanders. Luke McCaffrey. So another McCaffrey enters the NFL. Christian McCaffrey's younger brother.
Yep.
Just kind of to me, that, like I was mentioning before, it kind of rounded out what to me was a great first 3 rounds by the Washington Commanders. I feel like they used their 6 picks pretty well for the most part. And just what do you think between them and the Cardinals, the two teams? I think they both had the most amount of picks going into the draft. And I don't remember off the top of my head if they really got busy. What do you think for these two teams? Probably going to sit at the bottom of their respective divisions again. But what do you think just overall? Not, you don't have to go obviously not pick by pick because we're running out of time here. But what do you think of their 2 drafts overall? They had the quantity. I feel like they had, at least on the surface right now, they got some solid quality out of these picks for now.
Well, what's funny is we're going to see them play each other into the season as well. So we're going to see Jaden Daniels go up against this Arizona defense that added Max Melton in the second round. And we're going to see Marvin Harrison against Mike Sainristil, who the Commanders picked in I believe, the 3rd or 4th round there. Both teams did a good job. Again, they knew the pieces that they had to add, and they made the right call there. I think the Commanders, they got their quarterback they wanted. They added a really good tight end to that room because Zach Ertz is still pretty old. So they added Ben Sinnott from Kansas State, who's a very, very talented tight end. Luke McCaffrey has the opportunity to be a star if he can get some playing time there. And even their later picks, like Brandon Coleman out of TCU in the 3rd round for the Commanders, has the opportunity to break this offensive line and starting in week 1. Again, they've got Biadez, they've got, Trent Scott there. They've got a bunch of good pieces on that line. So the Commanders, well, you're right. They're not going to be the top tier of your NFC East. If they are, God help you. But, they've got good pieces, good stepping stones going forward here. And the Cardinals, same thing. I mean, even after the Marvin Harrison pick, they still did really well. Darius Robinson was their other pick. That was the Houston pick that they had from last year's draft. Do you need defensive lineman? Great pick there. Max Melton, excellent pick. Later on,
from Rutgers.
Later on for them, Trey Benson, who has an opportunity to be the best running back in this class, and even Tip Ryman, the tight end from Illinois. A lot of people don't know about him that much, but he has the opportunity to be a real mammoth of a tight end for them. And again, that's a spot that they need help with that. They again, you can say, oh, they got Trey McBride a couple years ago. Why did they need him? He's 6'5", 270. Do you want him blocking you when you have Trey Benson or Amari DiMercato running down your throat all the time? I don't think so. I don't want to be that guy in any alley, as we get the Gooch would say.
There's a lot of very interesting twin tight end sets that the Cardinals could run going forward, so it should be very interesting. Running down, and again, we're not going to go blow for blow. I think real quick, some last thoughts about wide receiver. What did you think of Adonai Mitchell? We talked about his teammate going to the Chiefs before. Adonai Mitchell going to the Colts at 52 overall, Rick.
I liked it. I mean, he, like I said, there was a case to be made that he would go in the later first round like Xavier Worthy did, but I think that he goes into a really good system with the Colts. I think that it gives Anthony Richardson another weapon on that wide receiver class with Josh Downs and Pierce and Pittman. It gives you another opportunity. And Mitchell's a physical athlete. He is 6'2", 205. He's a two-time national champion because he played at Georgia and then went to Texas as well. So he won 2 titles with Georgia and then made another college football playoff with the Longhorns. So he knows what he's doing, and he's just got to be around the ball a lot more. That's the thing. Like, he caught 55 passes in his final year with Texas. If you want to be a top tier receiver, you got to be around the ball a little bit more. So he's got to get a little more separation ability, but he doesn't have to do that right away. The Colts have 3 top tier wide receivers, and Josh Downs last year was a blessing in disguise in Shane Steichen's offense. So, I think it was luxury, but I think he's a very good player. He's got a great speed. He's in a 4.3 4.40, which is phenomenal for a wide receiver, I think. And again, the Colts did the right thing. They added, around him, and they made the right call with taking Latu first, because I think defense is where they needed to go first, and they just added more pieces from there. So I like that selection for them. I know in our mock I said I wasn't high on him, but I couldn't guess why. But this is the right spot for him, I think.
Let's go rapid fire here to end this off, Rick. A player that was drafted in, it could be deeper than this, but maybe in the second or third round that you think, let's fast forwarding a year from now, it could be one of our candidates to say he could have and should have gone in the first round.
Ooh, okay. Let me think about that for a second here. Second or third round guy.
It could, if there's someone in the fourth, even, like, it could be that as well. But just the mind immediately goes to the second and third round.
Well, yeah, I mean, second or third round, I think is a better guy. I think that if I'm gonna go a little bit off the beaten path, which I love to do, Roger Rosengarten, who went late second round to Baltimore, the tackle from Washington, he's got a really good opportunity to make some waves, and I think that he's a guy that really went under the radar, obviously by getting the 62nd overall pick, but he's a strong, strong player who was part of that award-winning offensive line with the Washington Huskies. Block for Lamar Jackson. That's your goal. Block for Lamar, and then, make it work from there. Just get the Ravens back to the number 1 seed in the AFC, and I think he's a good player to do that for them. So I like that pick for them. I really did.
Nice. I personally have it's not that big of a leap. He only went a couple picks later. Early second round, a couple weeks away from the first round. But I think an early candidate, Jerjon Newton, going to Washington, the Nagurski Defensive Player of the Year, consensus All-American. I think he could be great for Washington for what they're trying to do going forward. Any one selection, it could be you thought they went higher than you thought, Rick. Maybe they went lower in the draft than you thought. Just a player and where they went that, like, it surprised you.
I not that it was higher or lower, but I was surprised that he was still around at this point, because I thought he would go a little bit higher. But that was the Bears pick in the third round, Kieran Amakadaji from Yale, the tackle. I thought that he was going to be a little bit higher because I thought there were teams that needed other tackles or other interior linemen that could have taken him, because he's another guy. And the Hog Mollies are really, really my stars here, but, like, he's another guy that will settle it right away. And again, block for Caleb Williams. Just block for the new guy in the block. I also like that Torrey Taylor, the punter from Iowa, was taken in the fourth round. Guys, that's what Caleb Williams saying. You're not going to be needed for much of the season, buddy. We're not going to be punting a whole lot. But when they do need him, Torrey Taylor's got an opportunity to break some of Ryan Stonehouse's records this year. He's that good of a punter. And again, I get it. Fourth round's not really where you take a guy.
Right.
But why not? Why not Chris Trapasso, CBS Sports? Why not?
Why not? For me, not because, like, maybe he would have gone a little bit high. I think Kyrie Jackson. I think I could have seen him in a different scenario where he could have gone late third round rather than early fourth round. But a solid pickup. Unfortunately for him, he's going to the Vikings. But I think they're in maybe a redraft a year from now. I think he goes maybe a little bit higher. I liked him coming out. I think he was a good corner, so I think there's a chance. And maybe even Troy Franklin. These Oregon boys. I think 1 year from now, it wouldn't surprise me if one of them would go higher if you had to immediately redraft this draft. One last rapid fire, Rick, and then we are done. Kind of similar to the first one, but one, not that we think a year from now we would redraft them into the first, but just one of these later round picks you think is going to be a hit for their team.
Ooh, one of the later round picks that's going to be a hit. Again, it's a guy that I really liked when we were talking about him, but I think Tommy Eichenberg's got a real good shot in Vegas. I mean, he's a disciplined player with a lot of good leadership opportunities, and he's got a really good motor on him. I know he's picked in the fifth round, but I think he should have gone higher in, like, the third, like later third round, maybe mid third round, because he's a very talented linebacker out of a very good pedigree system. And if he gets the opportunity with the Raiders, because again, the Raiders on the linebacking core, I think they needed a little bit more than that because aside from Divine Diablo, not really a whole lot there. So he's got an opportunity to break that mold. So I think that was a good selection by them. Could have gone higher, but I think he's going to prove to be a real steal.
I think the Ravens had some good picks in the 4th round. As a quick shout out, they end up getting TJ Tampa, who I believe you selected
Yes.
in our mock draft. So they get him in the 4th round. But I'll give a shout out. This will be my last shout. Let's give the Bills a little bit of credit with their 5th round selection, 141st overall, Cedric Van Pran and Granger. Like I think it's especially because they lost a little bit on the offensive line. I think the kid's probably going to be starting early. And if you could say you got an offensive line started in the 5th round, it's a pretty good job, if you ask me. So it'll be very interesting, and we will continue the draft discussion next week, ladies and gentlemen. Is going to be the end of the show this week. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's edition of the Sports Agents of Chaos podcast. The draft had so much action in it, clearly. We went with some big storylines. We started to go a little bit detailed, and then we're going to continue that next week. We're going to give you guys maybe a little bit closer to something of winners and losers of the draft overall. We'll have our other Jets fan back here. He'll give his opinion on his picks overall, and it's going to be a fun time as we continue to talk of the 2024 NFL draft recap. Next week, it'll be part 2. Guys, like I said at the start, the draft's over. It's going to be a lot to talk about over the next coming months as we try to crawl our way ultimately to our division previews as we've done the last 2 years. For the 3rd straight year, we'll be doing that, and we can't wait for all of you to join us on that journey. Thanks so much for another week of fun, football, and chaos, and we'll see you guys next time.